I bought my parents a home, but found them shoved in the hallway. My Sil Smirked, "We're claiming the master suite." I dropped the deed and said, "Get out of my house." To understand the absolute, unyielding rage that consumed me on that Saturday afternoon, you first have to understand the people I was fighting for. My name is Caroline. I am 32 years old, and for the last 10 years, my entire existence has been driven by a single, unwavering goal: to buy my parents their freedom. I work in interior design and real estate investment, flipping properties in the city. But the money I made was never really about the luxury cars or the designer clothes. It was always about the calluses on my father's hands. My dad, Gordon, is 68 years old. For 40 years, he worked as a bricklayer. He is the kind of man who speaks softly, works until his bones ache, and never asks the universe for a favor. If you look at him today, you can see the history of our family mapped out on his body. His spine has a permanent curve to it, a heavy, sloping arch created by decades of lifting cinder blocks and mixing heavy cement in the scorching summer sun and the freezing winter sleet. The smell of dry mortar and sweat is practically baked into his skin. He never bought a new car for himself. For as long as I can remember, he drove a succession of rusted, terrifyingly loud pickup trucks that always seemed one pothole away from complete collapse, just so he could afford to pay for my art supplies and keep food on the table. And then there is my mother, Edith. She is 65 now, but she spent the better part of her adult life working the graveyard shift at a local 24-hour grocery store. She would leave the house at 10 o'clock at night, restock heavy boxes of canned goods until 6 in the morning, come home, sleep for maybe 4 hours, and then wake up to cook dinner and help us with our homework. She did this so she could always be present for us during the day. She practically destroyed her own circadian rhythm for decades just to make sure my older brother Derek and I never felt neglected. Speaking of Derek, my brother is 35, an accountant, and what you might call the golden boy of the family. Not because he achieved extraordinary things, but because he was the firstborn son. He was a soft-spoken, passive guy who hated conflict more than anything in the world. Growing up, if there was extra money, it went to Derek's hockey gear or his college prep courses. I didn't resent my parents for it, they were doing their best with the traditional mindset they had. But it meant that I had to fight tooth and nail for everything I got. I wore second-hand clothes, took out massive student loans, and hustled my way through the brutal world of real estate. That struggle gave me a thick skin. Derek's smooth ride gave him a spine made of marshmallows. He learned early on that if he just kept his head down and avoided making waves, things would work out. That passivity was annoying when we were kids. But as adults, it would become the catalyst for the greatest betrayal our family had ever seen. By the time I hit 30, my real estate business took off. I had a few incredibly lucky, highly profitable flips that changed my financial trajectory forever. Suddenly, I wasn't just surviving, I had real, substantial wealth. And the very first thing I wanted to do with it was fulfill the silent promise I made to myself when I was a teenager watching my dad rub cheap ointment on his ruined back. I was going to buy them a house. Not just a house, but a sanctuary. It took me 6 grueling months of searching before I found it. It was a beautiful, single-story craftsman bungalow in a quiet, upscale suburban neighborhood about 45 minutes away from my apartment in the city. It had a wraparound porch, mature oak trees in the front yard, and the kind of solid, historical bones that make a designer's heart skip a beat. The price tag was $450,000. I didn't want my parents to have to worry about a monthly payment ever again. So, I liquidated a significant portion of my stock portfolio and bought the house entirely in cash. No bank loans. No interest rates. No mortgage. Just a clean, unencumbered deed. I spent the next 8 months renovating it in complete secrecy. I didn't just paint the walls, I curated every single inch of that space to cater to their aging bodies and their specific dreams. I made sure the master bedroom, which I call the master suite, was on the ground floor. It had a massive ensuite bathroom with a walk-in shower and a built-in bench, specifically designed so my dad wouldn't have to climb stairs or step over a high bathtub lip with his bad knees. For my mom, I took the brightest room in the house, the one with the big south-facing windows, and turned it into her personal hobby room. I hired a custom carpenter to build specialized shelving to hold her massive collection of fabrics and her grandmother's vintage Singer sewing machine. I painted the living room walls a very specific, calming shade of sage green that she had always admired in home and garden magazines but could never afford to use in their dingy, rented apartments. 3 weeks ago, I finally brought them to the house. I handed them the keys and watched them cry. My dad's hands were shaking so hard he almost dropped the brass keyring. My mom walked through the kitchen, touching the quartz countertops like they were made of magic. It was the proudest moment of my entire life. They were safe. They were secure. They were homeowners. Of course, no good deed goes unpunished, and every peaceful kingdom eventually attracts a parasite. Ours came in the form of my sister-in-law, Chelsea. Derek met Chelsea about 4 years ago. She is 33, and her official job title on her social media profiles is lifestyle consultant. As far as I can tell, this profession involves drinking $8 oat milk lattes, posting heavily filtered photos of aesthetically pleasing beige rooms, and absolutely nothing that actually generates a reliable income. From the moment she entered our lives, it was clear she was obsessed with projecting an image of extreme wealth that Derek's modest accountant's salary simply could not support. The toxicity started long before the house incident. 3 years ago, when they were planning their wedding, Chelsea didn't just have preferences, she had demands. She demanded that my parents pay for a lavish rehearsal dinner at a downtown steakhouse. The bill was going to be close to $10,000. My parents, being the overly accommodating people they are, actually considered taking out a high-interest personal loan to cover it because they didn't want to disappoint Derek. When I found out, I stepped in and quietly paid the restaurant directly. I saved my parents from the debt, but Chelsea happily took the credit, boasting to her friends about her fabulous in-laws. She constantly asked me to design her tiny 2-bedroom apartment for free, and when I sourced high-quality furniture for her at wholesale cost, she complained that the brands weren't luxurious enough for her online aesthetic. She treated my parents not as family, but as a bottomless resource to be tapped. Things escalated dramatically 5 months ago when Chelsea announced she was pregnant. Suddenly, her entitlement metastasized into something truly unbearable. She was carrying the first grandchild, and she weaponized that fact daily. She constantly talked about how her environment was too stressful, how she needed more resources, how her swollen ankles required special treatment. She expected everyone to orbit around her uterus. And Derek, true to his nature, just folded completely. He became less of a husband and more of a nervous, exhausted butler, terrified of triggering one of her hormonal meltdowns. I knew Chelsea was greedy. I knew she was manipulative. But I genuinely believed that because I lived 45 minutes away, and because my parents finally had their own private fortress, they would be insulated from her worst behaviors. I was wrong. I was so incredibly wrong. It was a beautiful Saturday afternoon, exactly 3 weeks after I had handed Gordon and Edith the keys to their new life. I had just finished a tough week closing a commercial real estate deal in the city, and I wanted to see my parents. I wanted to see my dad napping in his new recliner and my mom organizing her fabrics in the sunlight. I hadn't told them I was coming, I wanted it to be a surprise. I stopped by a high-end wine shop, bought a bottle of expensive vintage champagne, and started the 45-minute drive to the suburbs. The drive was peaceful. I had the windows down, listening to the radio, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. I had set up a state-of-the-art security camera system around the perimeter of their house, mostly for my own peace of mind, but I hadn't checked the feed all week. Because my dad is a bit old school and proud, I didn't want him to feel like I was spying on him. So, I had transferred the master account alerts to his iPad. If someone rang the doorbell or pulled into the driveway, it pinged his device, not my phone. It was a gesture of respect, giving them true ownership of the property. But that lack of notifications meant I was driving completely blind into a nightmare. As I turned onto their quiet, tree-lined street, my peaceful mood evaporated instantly. Something was wrong. Very wrong. The driveway, which was usually empty except for my dad's old truck, was absolutely choked with vehicles. Not just one or two cars, but a fleet of them. There were pristine white SUVs, expensive imported sedans, and a shiny luxury crossover parked halfway on the freshly manicured lawn I had paid a landscaper to install. My dad's truck was nowhere to be seen, likely forced out to park blocks away. I pulled my car to the curb, staring at the house in confusion. The champagne bottle felt heavy and cold against my leg. As I got closer to the front porch, the solid oak front door was propped wide open. And through the screen door, I could hear it. The low, thumping bass of upbeat jazz music, mixed with the piercing, overlapping chatter of dozens of voices. It sounded like a cocktail lounge at happy hour. My heart started to pound. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. My parents didn't have a large social circle. They certainly didn't host massive daytime raggers. I gripped the neck of the champagne bottle tight enough to make my knuckles ache and stepped onto the porch. I pulled open the screen door and stepped into the entryway. My brain simply could not process the visual data my eyes were sending it. It was like walking into an alternate dimension. The house I had poured my soul into, the house I had meticulously designed to be a quiet, soothing retreat, had been completely hijacked. The air was thick and suffocating. The fresh scent of new wood and clean linen had been completely obliterated by the cloying, aggressive smell of heavily perfumed lilies and at least 30 different expensive designer perfumes. The open-concept living room was swarming with people. There were dozens of women I had never seen before in my life. They were all dressed in pastel sundresses, designer heels, and oversized jewelry. They were milling about, holding crystal flutes filled with bright orange mimosas, laughing loudly and pointing at the crown molding I had installed with my own 2 hands. But it wasn't just the people, it was the sheer disrespect for the space. Right in the center of the room, completely blocking the beautiful stone fireplace I had restored, was a massive, gaudy archway made of pink and gold balloons. It looked cheap, tacky, and utterly out of place against the elegant sage green walls. They had pushed the expensive, custom-ordered sofa against the wall to make room for a giant table covered in pastel-colored gift bags and a ridiculous diaper cake shaped like a castle. I stood there in the foyer, invisible to the crowd, feeling a sensation that wasn't just anger. It was a physical blow to the chest. A sudden, sickening drop in my stomach that made me feel dizzy. This wasn't a casual visit. This was a full-blown, catered event. "Oh, excuse me, watch your back." I blinked. A woman in a floral dress, holding 2 empty mimosa glasses, brushed past me, her shoulder hitting mine hard enough to make me stumble. She didn't even look at my face. "Are you with the catering staff?" she chirped, her tone dripping with casual condescension. "We need more cocktail napkins by the diaper cake station. The ones with the gold foil, not the plain white ones." "Thanks." Before I could even form a syllable to respond, she fluttered away back into the sea of pastel dresses. I looked down at my hands. I was wearing a tailored blazer and holding a $300 bottle of champagne, but in this house, in my house, I was being treated like the hired help. I took a deep, shaky breath. The rage was rising so fast it felt like it was going to choke me. I needed to find Gordon and Edith. I needed to know why this was happening. I pushed my way through the crowd, ignoring the annoyed looks from women who had to step aside. I scanned the living room, looking for the homeowners. I expected to find my mom sitting in her new velvet armchair, maybe looking overwhelmed but smiling politely. I expected to see my dad chatting awkwardly near the kitchen island. I didn't see them. I kept walking, checking the dining area, the sunroom. Finally, my eyes landed on a dark, forgotten corner of the living room, near the hallway entrance. There, squeezed between a decorative potted plant and a side table, was a small, stiff, faded love seat. It was a piece of junk furniture from their old apartment that we hadn't gotten around to throwing away yet. And sitting on it, shrinking into the ugly fabric, was my mother. Edith looked incredibly small. She was wearing a nice blouse, but her posture was defensive, her shoulders hunched forward. She was clutching a cardboard drink coaster with both hands, staring straight ahead, looking absolutely terrified to set it down on any of the nearby tables, as if she were afraid she would ruin the party by existing. She wasn't a hostess. She looked like a hostage. The sight of her cowering made my blood run cold. But then I turned my head, and I saw my father. And that was the moment my heart truly broke. Gordon was standing in the narrow hallway that connected the kitchen to the laundry room. A man who had spent 4 decades breaking his back to build structures for other people, a man who finally owned a beautiful piece of real estate, was standing in a high-traffic corridor. He was holding a flimsy white paper plate. On the plate was a single, pathetic scoop of cold pasta salad. He was eating standing up. His bad back was pressed flat against the drywall, and he was actively trying to suck his stomach in, trying to make himself as thin as possible so the hired catering servers rushing past him wouldn't bump into him. He looked displaced. He looked ashamed. He looked like an intruder who had snuck in through the back door. My parents were not the guests of honor. They were not the homeowners showing off their new place. In this house that I had bought with my own sweat and money, Chelsea had managed to turn them into the help. They were exiles in their own castle. I closed my eyes for 3 seconds. I wanted to scream. I wanted to hurl the champagne bottle directly into the center of that stupid pink balloon arch and watch the glass shatter. I wanted to flip the gift table and yell until my vocal cords bled. But I am a businesswoman. I deal with ruthless contractors, shady sellers, and high-stakes negotiations every single day. I learned a long time ago that emotional outbursts get you labeled as crazy and ignored. Cold, calculated strategy, backed by undeniable leverage, gets you results. I wasn't going to throw a tantrum. I was going to execute a demolition. I opened my eyes. The shock was gone. Only the ice remained. I set the champagne bottle down quietly on a side table, smoothed the lapels of my blazer, and started walking toward the hallway. If you're feeling frustrated on Caroline's behalf and can't wait to see how she'll get revenge on her shameless sister-in-law, please take a second to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment letting me know the city you live in. Every comment helps this video reach more viewers, so that stories like this don't fade into oblivion. Thank you so much. Now, let's get back to the perfect revenge. I took a long, steadying breath, forcing my heart rate to slow down. I walked down that narrow hallway toward my father, Gordon. When he saw me, a look of profound relief washed over his face, followed immediately by a wave of deep, crushing shame. He tried to hide that flimsy paper plate behind his back like a child caught snacking before dinner. A man who had built skyscrapers and schools was hiding a scoop of pasta salad in his own home. "Gordon, why are you eating in the hallway?" I asked, my voice low and dangerous. "Why aren't you sitting at the dining table I bought for you?" He looked down at his shoes, those old, scuffed work boots that looked so jarringly out of place against the polished hardwood floors I had picked out. "Oh, well, you know, Caroline," he whispered, his voice raspy. "Chelsea needed the table for the gift display, and all the chairs were taken by her friends. It's fine, really. I don't mind standing. It keeps the circulation going in my legs." He forced a weak, heartbreaking smile that made me want to burn the whole world down. Before I could respond, I felt a sharp tap on my shoulder. I turned around to find Chelsea standing there. She didn't look happy to see me. She looked annoyed, as if I were a stubborn wine stain on a brand new white rug. She was glowing with that specific brand of smug satisfaction that only she could master, her hand resting protectively over her baby bump. "Caroline, you're here," she said, her smile tight and not reaching her eyes. "Derek said you were buried in some big project in the city. We didn't think you'd make the drive." "I decided to surprise my parents," I said, keeping my face as impassive as stone. "Since, you know, this is their house." Chelsea let out a small, dismissive laugh, waving her hand as if swatting away a fly. "Oh, sure, sure. But we're all family, right? And honestly, look at this place. It was just screaming for an event like this. Gordon and Edith barely used the living room anyway. They prefer the quieter corners. They prefer them? I asked, tilting my head. Or were they told to stay in them? Chelsea's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but she recovered with the speed of a seasoned predator. She stepped closer, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. Look, Caroline, let's be real. They're old. They don't need all this space. Derek and I are the ones building a future. We're the growing family. It just makes sense for us to maximize the utility of the property. We've actually been discussing some changes for the nursery upstairs. The nursery? I repeated, my voice flat. I had designed that room specifically as a hobby room for my mother's sewing. Yes, Chelsea said, preening slightly. The lighting in there is terrible for a baby, and we need to repaint. That sage green is a bit dated. We were thinking a soft, modern gray. I looked over her shoulder at my brother, Derek. He saw me looking and immediately pretended to be very interested in a tray of deviled eggs. He knew. He knew exactly what was happening, and he was letting it happen because it was easier than standing up to her. So, you've moved in? I asked. We're transitioning, Chelsea corrected, smoothing her maternity dress. It's better for everyone. We can help take care of them, and we get the space we need. It's a win-win. In fact, we've decided we're claiming the master suite downstairs. The stairs are just too dangerous for me in my condition, and Gordon and Edith really don't need that big bathroom anyway. She looked at me with absolute confidence. She truly believed that because she was pregnant and because my parents were too kind to say no, she had already won. She thought this was her house now. She turned back to her guests, clapping her hands. Okay, everyone. Gift opening time. I watched her walk away, treating me like a guest in the home I had paid for with $450,000 of my own cash. She thought my silence was submission. She had forgotten that I am a woman who makes a living out of reading the fine print. I didn't storm into the center of the room. That would have been the emotional reaction, and I needed to be surgical. I needed to know the full extent of the damage before I pulled the trigger. I need to use the restroom, I told Derek as I passed him. He looked relieved, thinking I was retreating. Yeah, sure, he mumbled. Use the one upstairs. The downstairs one is, well, Chelsea is storing the extra gift bags in there. I climbed the stairs, the oak treads I had lovingly refinished feeling solid beneath my heels. As soon as I reached the landing, the noise of the party faded into a dull roar, replaced by a different kind of tension. The air up here smelled different, sharper, like fresh, cheap paint and dishonesty. I walked to the door of what was supposed to be the guest room, the room I had intended for myself or other relatives to stay in when visiting. The door was wide open. Inside, it looked like a storage unit had exploded. There were boxes stacked nearly to the ceiling, all neatly labeled in my mother's handwriting: kitchen, living room knickknacks, Gordon's books. My heart hammered against my ribs. Chelsea hadn't just redecorated the downstairs. She had purged it. She had packed up 40 years of my parents' lives and shoved them into a single 10 by 12 room, preparing to erase their footprint from the main house entirely. I moved down the hall to the hobby room. This was the room with the best light in the house, facing south. I had installed custom shelving for my mother's sewing machine and her vast collection of fabrics. It was supposed to be her happy place. I pushed the door open, and the breath caught in my throat. The room was unrecognizable. The walls, which I had painted a warm, creamy white to reflect the sun, were now a slapdash, headache-inducing shade of baby blue. The custom shelving I had paid a master carpenter thousands of dollars to install was gone, ripped out, leaving jagged, ugly holes in the drywall that had been hastily spackled over but not even sanded. In the center of the room stood a half-assembled crib. But the real blow was in the corner. Shoved aggressively against the closet door was my mother's vintage Singer sewing machine. It was upside down. That machine had belonged to her grandmother, it was the only thing she had left from her. Seeing it treated like a piece of scrap metal made a flash of heat ignite behind my eyes. I felt sick. This wasn't a family helping each other out. This was a hostile takeover. Chelsea was planning to relegate my parents to the cramped guest room while she and Derek lived like royalty in the master suite. I pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of absolute clarity. I dialed my lawyer, Benjamin. It was Saturday, but I paid a substantial retainer for a reason. Caroline? Benjamin answered on the second ring. Is everything okay? You're supposed to be celebrating the housewarming today. I am, I said, my voice sounding like steel. Benjamin, I need you to confirm the status of the deed transfer to the trust. It's finalized, right? The one that lists me as the sole trustee and my parents as the beneficiaries. Yes, it was recorded 3 weeks ago, Benjamin said, sounding confused. Technically, the legal owner is the Edith and Gordon Irrevocable Trust, but you have full executive power as the trustee until their passing. Why? And there is no lease agreement for any other tenants? No subletting clauses? Caroline, you know there isn't, Benjamin replied. You wrote the bylaws yourself. It's a single-family residence for the primary use of the beneficiaries. Anyone else is a guest at your discretion. Great, I said, staring at the baby blue walls. And what is the legal definition of a guest who refuses to leave in this state? Benjamin paused for a second. If they've been there less than 30 days and have no written lease, they are considered guests at will. You can ask them to leave immediately. If they refuse, it's trespassing. Caroline, what is going on? A hostile takeover, I said. And I'm about to execute an eviction. Stand by. I hung up and took a picture of the destroyed hobby room. I took a picture of the sewing machine lying upside down. I walked back toward the master suite, the room that was supposed to be my parents' retreat. I had splurged on a California king bed with high thread count linens. The door was closed, but I turned the handle and stepped inside anyway. The bed was covered in designer shopping bags and Chelsea's clothes. On the dresser, my father's framed photos of his grandkids were turned face down. In their place stood a row of ultrasound photos and a tacky framed quote that said, "Manifest your dreams." I opened the walk-in closet. My mother's modest wardrobe had been pushed to the far back, squeezed into a dark corner. The front two-thirds of the rack were filled with Chelsea's entire wardrobe, high-end coats, evening gowns, and rows of expensive shoes. But then, I saw something else. On the nightstand, there was an opened envelope from a local credit union. I picked it up. It was an inquiry for a home equity line of credit, a loan against the house. The names on the application were Gordon and Edith, but the contact email was Chelsea's. She wasn't just stealing their space. She was trying to steal their equity. She was trying to use the house I bought in cash as an ATM to fund her lifestyle. The final straw didn't just break, it incinerated. I checked my watch. 2:15 in the afternoon. The party was in full swing. Perfect. I walked out of the bedroom and headed back downstairs. I didn't push through the crowd this time. I moved with such directed, predatory energy that the women in pastel dresses parted from me instinctively. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, the atmosphere had shifted. The gift opening was over, and the main event was beginning. A 3-tiered monstrosity of a cake, with fondant baby shoes on top, had been placed on the dining table. Chelsea was holding a silver cake knife, posing for a picture while Derek stood awkwardly beside her, his hand hovering near her waist, but not quite touching it. "Okay, everyone," Chelsea chirped, her voice carrying over the music. "Cake time. And then, we'll do a full tour of the new nursery upstairs." She was going to take these strangers upstairs to show off how she had desecrated my mother's sewing room. "Chelsea," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the chatter like a knife. Chelsea looked up, the cake knife poised in midair. Her smile stiffened. "Caroline." You're just in time for cake, she said, trying to regain control of the room. I was just upstairs, I interrupted, standing 5 feet from her. The room went dead quiet. Someone near the stereo wisely turned the jazz music down. I went to use the restroom, but I ended up taking a look at the renovations, I said, crossing my arms. Chelsea's eyes darted to Derek, then back to me. Oh, well, it's not finished. Obviously, the nursery is still a work in progress. I'm not talking about the nursery, I said. I'm talking about the master suite. I'm talking about the fact that your designer shoes are on the rack while my mother's clothes are shoved into a dark corner like dirty laundry. I'm talking about my father's things being boxed up in a guest room while you treat the downstairs like your personal palace. I turned to my parents, who were still huddled in the corner. My mother looked terrified. Mom, I asked, my voice softening just for her. Did you agree to move into the guest room? Edith looked at Chelsea, then at Derek. I saw the fear in her eyes, the fear of causing a rift, the fear of losing access to her future grandchild. We just want to help, she whispered. Chelsea said the baby needs the room near the bathroom, and the stairs are dangerous for her right now. The master suite is on the first floor, Mom, I said gently. The room with the ensuite bathroom that I built specifically so you and Dad wouldn't have to climb stairs. I turned back to Chelsea. You moved 2 people in their 70s upstairs so you could have the luxury suite. Chelsea dropped the sweet hostess act. Her face hardened, her chin tilting up defensively. It's temporary, Caroline. God, you're making such a scene in front of my guests. I'm pregnant. I have swollen ankles. I need the bathtub. Gordon and Edith barely use that big bathroom anyway. It's wasted on them. It's their house, I said, articulating every syllable. It's family property. Chelsea snapped, her voice rising. Derek is their son. I'm carrying their grandchild. We are the future of this family. We need the support. We need the space. What are they going to do with 4 bedrooms? It's selfish for them to rattle around in this big house while we're crammed into a tiny apartment. The word hung in the air, selfish. She had just called my parents, the people who had spent 40 years sacrificing every comfort for their children, selfish. Selfish? I repeated, stepping closer. My father is eating cold food standing up in a hallway. My mother is afraid to sit on her own furniture. And you call them selfish? I'm hosting an event. Chelsea yelled, throwing her hands up. I'm trying to build a network. I'm trying to set up a life for your nephew. Derek, say something. Derek looked like he wanted to dissolve into the floorboards. Caroline, he mumbled, his eyes pleading. Let's just talk about this later, okay? Not in front of everyone. No, I said. We're talking about it now, because later implies there's a negotiation, and I need to make it very clear that there isn't one. You're unbelievable, Chelsea scoffed, looking at her friends for validation. A few of them murmured in agreement, shooting me dirty looks. To them, I was just the jealous sister-in-law ruining a pregnant woman's special day. She thinks because she helped with the design, she owns the place, Chelsea told the crowd, creating her own narrative. But let's get the facts straight, Caroline. Derek and I are taking over the payments. We discussed it with Gordon last week. We're going to pay the mortgage, so technically, this is going to be our house. We're doing them a favor by taking the financial burden off them so they can relax. I froze. I looked at my dad. He was staring at the floor, his face bright red. Dad, I asked. Did they tell you they were taking over the mortgage? Gordon nodded slowly. Derek said, he said the taxes and the insurance and the mortgage were going to be too much for us on a fixed income. He said if they moved in, they'd pay the monthly note. It seemed fair. My blood boiled. This was the manipulation. This was the con. Chelsea, I said, my voice dangerously low. There is no mortgage. Chelsea blinked. What? There is no mortgage. I repeated, louder this time. I didn't help with the design. I bought this house in cash for $450,000. I paid the property taxes for the next 5 years in advance. I paid the insurance in full. There is no financial burden, Chelsea. The only burden in this house is you. The gasps from the guests were audible this time. Chelsea's face went from blotchy red to a ghostly white. She turned to Derek. You said we were taking over the mortgage to get on the deed. Derek flinched. I assumed there was a mortgage. Most houses have mortgages. You assumed? I said, looking at my brother with a mixture of pity and disgust. You tried to trick our parents into signing over ownership rights in exchange for paying a debt that didn't even exist. We weren't tricking them. Chelsea shrieked, her poise completely gone. We're family. It all goes to us eventually anyway. We just accelerated the timeline because we need it now. I don't care what you think you need, I said. I care about the fact that you ripped out my mother's sewing room. It's a nursery. Chelsea screamed. I need a nursery. You're being hysterical. Look, fine. You paid for the house. Good for you, moneybags. But possession is what matters. We live here. Our stuff is here. We're receiving mail here. You can't just kick out a pregnant woman and her husband. We have rights. We're tenants. She crossed her arms, a smug, triumphant look returning to her face. She thought she had me. I'm glad you brought that up, I said. I reached into my bag and pulled out the thick blue folder embossed with the county seal. You see, Chelsea, to be a tenant, you usually need a lease or you need to have paid rent. You've done neither. According to state law, since you've been here less than 30 days, which I can prove since I have the text messages from Derek asking for the gate code 3 weeks ago, you are considered guests at will. Chelsea's smirk wavered. I have the security camera logs, I lied smoothly. And I have the dated receipts from the movers you hired. Don't try to bluff me, Chelsea. I do this for a living. I opened the folder and held up the deed so everyone could see the gold stamp. This is the deed. It lists the owner as the Edith and Gordon Irrevocable Trust. And do you know who the sole trustee is? I looked her dead in the eye. Me. I slammed the deed down on the table right next to the cake, making the plastic stand rattle. And as the trustee, I am officially revoking your guest privileges. And one more thing, I added, pulling up my phone. I found the mail you opened, Chelsea. The inquiry for a home equity line of credit. You were trying to leverage the equity in my paid-off house to take out a loan in Gordon and Edith's names to fund your lifestyle. That's fraud. And since I am the trustee, I am the only one who can authorize a lien. You were trying to steal from them. The room erupted in whispers. The guests were no longer confused, they were scandalized. Attempting to trick elderly in-laws into massive debt was a line even they wouldn't cross. Chelsea grabbed Derek's arm, desperate for an ally. Derek, do something. She's humiliating me. She's stressing the baby. Tell her to get out. Derek looked at his wife. Then he looked at the deed on the table. Then he looked at our father, still holding his paper plate in the hallway. For the first time in his life, Derek pulled his arm away. You lied to me, he whispered. You told me the house had a mortgage. You told me we were helping them. I did it for us. Chelsea screamed, her voice cracking. For our family. Who cares how we get the money? They don't need it. They're old. They're just sitting on a gold mine while we struggle. Get out. The voice didn't come from me. It didn't come from Derek. We all turned. My mother, Edith, had stood up. She was no longer shrinking into the corner. She walked over to the table, picked up that Boss Babe framed print, and dropped it into the trash can. Do not use that child as a shield, Edith said, her voice shaking with an intensity one had never heard before. I raised 2 children in a one-bedroom apartment while working nights. We never stole. We never lied. And we never, ever treated family like servants. She pointed to the door. This is Caroline's house. She bought it for us. And you have disrespected her, you have disrespected Gordon, and you have disrespected me. You are not welcome here. Take your balloons, take your cake, and get out. Chelsea looked at the crowd of women, who were now actively fleeing the scene, leaving their gifts behind in their haste to escape the drama. She looked at Derek, who refused to meet her gaze. She let out a scream of frustration, grabbed her purse, and stormed out the front door, slamming it so hard the windows rattled. I didn't let Derek leave immediately. I made him help. You're going to pack everything, I told him. Every piece of clothing, every decoration she put up. I want it all in the garage by sunset. Derek didn't argue. He moved like a ghost. He spent an hour in the master suite, stripping the bed and moving Chelsea's expensive dresses into black garbage bags because we didn't have enough suitcases. While he packed, I called a locksmith. By 5 o'clock, the locks were changed. I went into the hobby room and dragged the crib apart. I moved the sewing machine back to its rightful spot, flipping it upright and dusting it off. I found the box of Gordon's books and brought it downstairs, placing it on the shelf next to his recliner. By 7 o'clock, the house looked like a home again. Derek stood by the front door, holding the last box of his things. He looked at Gordon and Edith, who were finally sitting on their couch, drinking tea. I'm sorry, Derek choked out. I didn't know about the loan. I swear. I wanted to make her happy. I thought if I gave her what she wanted, she'd stop being so angry. Edith stood up and hugged him, but it was a different kind of hug. It was the hug of a mother who loves her son but is profoundly disappointed in the man he has become. Love isn't about giving someone what they want at the expense of everyone else, she said gently. You have a lot of work to do, Derek. On yourself, and on your marriage. If there's even a marriage left to save. Derek nodded, tears spilling over. I'm staying at a motel tonight. Chelsea went to her mom's. I think I need some time alone. He looked at me. Thank you, Caroline, for stopping it. I don't think I could have. You could have, I said sternly. You just didn't. Next time, don't wait for your sister to save you. He nodded and walked out into the twilight. I locked the new deadbolt behind him. The sound of that click was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. 3 months later, the house is finally perfect. The sage green paint is back on the hobby room walls. The garden is blooming. As for Chelsea, the fallout was swift. The attempted fraud with the home equity loan was a step too far. When her own parents found out she had tried to trick Gordon and Edith, they took her in, but on strict conditions. She's living in their basement now, humbled by the total lack of luxury. Derek filed for divorce 2 weeks after the baby shower. It turns out the mortgage scam wasn't the only financial secret she was keeping. He's living in a small studio apartment now, going to therapy, and slowly rebuilding his relationship with us. He comes over every Sunday to mow the lawn for Dad, not because he has to, but because he wants to. I visited them yesterday. When I walked in, Mom was in her sewing room, the sun streaming over her shoulder as she worked on a quilt. Dad was in the living room, asleep in his recliner with a mystery novel on his chest. They weren't guests. They weren't servants. They were the owners. I had bought the house with money, but I had secured their home with the truth. And that was an investment that would pay dividends forever. My brother Derek is currently in therapy and begging for my forgiveness, saying he was blinded and manipulated by Chelsea's lies about the mortgage and the needs of the baby. But a part of me thinks he's just as guilty for standing in that hallway and letting his wife treat our parents like garbage, regardless of the money. So, Reddit. Am I the a-hole for keeping him at arm's length for now, or should I accept his apology and let him back into our family fully? Thank you so much for watching and listening to my story. If you haven't already, Please hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and let me know your verdict in the comments below. Your support helps me bring more stories like this to light. See you in the next video.